The old silver car swayed along the patchy highway. The driver, Elliot Granger, a young reporter from Chicago, leaned back in his seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Hundreds of miles on the road had left him weary, but more than just sleepiness weighed him down. A strange, creeping feeling stirred in his chest as he neared Harrow's End. Elliot had never imagined this trip would feel like an expedition into a forgotten land. At first, he had laughed when his boss mentioned a town that vanished every harvest season. It sounded like a tall tale, hardly believable. But now, with the withered cornfields stretching on either side of the road, yellow-brown leaves whistling in the wind, and a leaden-gray sky pressing down, he began to doubt himself. When Elliot arrived in town, a faded wooden sign welcomed him. Welcome to Harrow's End. Population 312. Yet the number 312 seemed overwritten, blurred like a stain of blood. He drove past the sign, frowning. Stopping at a dilapidated roadside inn, he received the key from a thin man with a hoarse voice and vacant eyes. No greeting, just a look that seemed to warn Elliot to stay silent. Inside his room, Elliot realized the utter isolation. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, only the wind howling from the cracks. He opened his notebook, jotting down a few lines, deciding he would explore the town in the morning. But on the very first night, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. They didn't open doors, didn't speak, just paused silently outside his room. Elliot held his breath, and then the footsteps vanished into the darkness. He forced a laugh, convincing himself it was just a drunken guest. Yet a sense of unease clung to him. In his dream, Elliot saw empty houses, windows like wide open eyes, and a tall, thin figure wearing a straw hat standing motionless in the cornfield. Waking in a sweat, he realized that Harrow's End was not merely a place for investigation. Something was watching him, patient and unblinking. Now, a morning mist blanketed Harrow's End, draping the empty streets like a funeral shroud. Elliot walked through the town, his eyes catching faint traces of life. An abandoned grocery store, a cash register still holding a few boxes of cereal, a small house with forgotten children's toys, a bicycle leaning by the roadside, coated in rusty dust. Everything was there, but the owners had vanished. Inside the old library, the scent of damp paper filled his nostril. Elliot flipped through dusty newspapers, eyes glued to articles about families disappearing during harvest season or young people wandering into the fields, never to return. One article from 1897 made him shiver. A poor farmer left to die of thirst in the fields, his name printed in the paper, matching Elliot's own last name, Granger. He blinked, telling himself it was only coincidence. Yet the chill crawling down his spine refused to fade. Looking up, he saw a tall, thin figure wearing a straw hat in the field, reflected in the dusty window pane. Elliot rubbed his eyes, looked again. The figure was gone. Only his own pale face remained, blurred within the glass. Night fell, and the inn sank into silence. Heavy footsteps echoed along the hallway, just as they had on the first night. This time, Elliot didn't close the door. He cracked it open to peek. The hallway was empty, lit only by a flickering yellow bulb. The footsteps vanished, but the wind from the window at the far end carried a rustling sound, rhythmic, like invisible hands sweeping across dry leaves. Elliot stepped outside, moving toward the window, staring out into the field. The rows of corn swayed, and a tall, thin figure with a wide straw hat appeared. He raised his camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit the moment. In that brief burst of light, The figure's face emerged. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a solid, oppressive darkness. Looking closer, Elliot recognized trembling shapes within the shadow, faint as if written in smoke. Granger Doughty. His heart froze. The whole town, the harvest season, the family curse. It seemed to have recognized him. No. The second day in Harrow's End began with a thin layer of mist shrouding the town, blurring the empty streets. Elliot stepped out of the inn, a hollow feeling wrapping around him like a heavy cloak. No one was in sight, yet everything bore traces of life. Slightly open windows, scattered children's toys, dusty bicycles resting by the roadside. He made his way to the old library once more. Inside, the shelves were thick with dust, yellowed papers stacked high to the ceiling. Elliot rifled through the records, hands trembling as he turned pages brittle as ash, eyes fixed on names marked with a single chilling word: missing. Hundreds, thousands of names spanning generations, like cracks in time swallowing whole families. Elliot paused over an old 1897 newspaper article. A poor farmer had died in the harvest fields, mouth still clinging to dry earth, eyes wide open, and the man's surname matched his own: Granger. A shiver ran down Elliot's spine. Past and present seemed to merge, as if these pages had been waiting for him to open them. When he looked back toward the window, his eyes caught a faint figure in the field. Tall, thin, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, standing motionless among the rows of corn. He held his breath. The figure vanished the moment he rubbed his eyes, yet the feeling of being watched remained, heavy and oppressive. That night, the inn sank into thick silence. The footsteps returned along the hallway, heavy, steady. This time, Elliot no longer felt the instinctive fear. He opened the door, eyes scanning the empty corridor. Only the flickering light and the gust of wind carried a rustling sound, rhythmic, like invisible hands sweeping over the dry leaves outside the window. Elliot moved to the window, staring out at the field. The corn swayed, and the tall, thin figure with the straw hat appeared. He raised his camera and clicked. The flash lit the moment, revealing a dense darkness within the figure, with no eyes, no nose, no mouth. When the camera screen came back on, Elliot saw what froze his heart. In the dark background, dozens, maybe hundreds of shadowy figures, all wearing straw hats, standing upright, facing him. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just empty gazes fixed on him, as if trying to engulf his very existence. Elliot stepped back, heart pounding. One thing was clear: Harrow's End was not merely an abandoned town. It was a field of curses where lost souls lingered, waiting. And he, Granger, had walked straight into its inescapable spiral. Ay, Marie. The early morning mist still shrouded Harrow's End as Elliot left the inn, his eyes dark-rimmed and his body weary. He gripped his notebook and pen like the only lifeline he had, walking toward the old town hall, a low building with crumbling brick walls, moss-covered roof tiles, and wooden doors creaking as he pushed them open. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, sunlight filtering through grimy window panes. File shelves were stacked high, many books nearly rotted away. Elliot groped through them like a man seeking lost memories, hands trembling as he turned each brittle page. A 19th century land registry book made him freeze. One name stood out: Nathaniel Granger, the owner of a large tract of land in Harrow's End in 1897. A note beside it read, "Sold to associates, disappeared with family." Elliot read it over and over, heart hammering. Nathaniel, his distant ancestor, the man who had helped seize a betrayed farmer's land, sowing the seed of the curse. Another record, a local court transcript, stated, "Granger and Associates deny responsibility," beneath which, scrawled faintly in ink, were the chilling words, "Blood debt must be paid, harvest season after harvest season." Elliot's whole body shook. He realized that his family name was not just connected to the curse, it was its root. The town, the family, the harvest, everything seemed to be waiting for him. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. When he looked up, dry handprints appeared on the walls, dozens, hundreds, layered, all pointing toward where he sat. Faint, yet freshly imprinted, as if hundreds of invisible entities had pressed close from all sides. Elliot leapt up, tripping over a bookshelf. A stack of files fell, papers scattering into the air. Among them, he spotted an old photograph, the Granger family at the turn of the century. The man in the center was Nathaniel, tall and dark-eyed. Beside him, a boy of about 10, his face eerily like Elio's, eyes wide as if staring through the lens directly into the future. He let the photo drop, yet the sense of being watched lingered. Even with eyes closed, he could see those gazes piercing through space and time, a reminder that the curse was not merely a thing of the past. Stepping outside, Elliot drew a deep breath. The town lay silent, like a graveyard. Yet deep down, he understood. From now on, he was no longer an observer. He had become part of a century-old chain of cursed blood. And the straw-hatted figure, the Harvest Man, had noticed. Far across the field, the figure appeared. This time, Elliot no longer saw him as a stranger. In the shadowy outline, it reflected a part of himself. A cold reminder that past and present, the Granger family and the curse, were now inseparably entwined with Elliot's life. No. The third night in Harrow's End did not arrive with a familiar whistle of wind, but with a heavy silence, like a blanket pulled tightly over one's head. Elliot lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the darkness. No cars passed, no insects chirped, not even the faint rustle of the cornfields. Everything was still. The town seemed to have stopped breathing. Elliot dozed fitfully, tension coiling in his body, and the dream came. He found himself standing in the endless field, moonlight glinting off the dry corn stalks, turning them into shimmering blades. In the distance, a figure approached, Harvest Man. Slow, deliberate, the scythe in his hand cutting through the darkness. With each step he took, the rows of corn behind him silently collapsed, as if harvested clean. Elliot tried to turn and run, but his feet were rooted to the ground, heavy as stone. The face of Harvest Man, the same inky darkness he had seen in the photograph, absorbed the moonlight, swallowing even the air around it. Within that darkness, countless other faces appeared, old and young, all wearing straw hats, their eyes hollow, mouths whispering endlessly. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3 a.m. The room was icy, but what made Elliot shiver most was the smell, the scent of dry earth and rotting straw, thick as if the entire field had been dumped inside his room. Sitting up, he turned on the light and looked around. The bedspread was coated in pale brown dust, crumbled earth mixed with dry corn fibers. He checked his camera, but the screen was pitch black, even though the battery was full. When the flash briefly lit the room, he caught his reflection. Yet his eyes were empty, dark hollows gouged out of his face. The next day, Elliot wandered the town. Strange signs appeared everywhere. On brick walls, scrawled words, "It's harvest time." Clotheslines swayed in the wind, though no one lived there. The clatter of horse hooves echoed along the roadside, yet the street was empty, as if the sound came from a time long past. That evening, returning to the inn, the clerk remained silent, eyes vacant as he handed over the key. Elliot noticed his hands trembling slightly, as if holding something unbearably heavy. Sleep was impossible. Sitting by the window, gazing at the misty fields, Elliot saw the harvestman appear, motionless. Around him, dozens of other figures rose from the earth, silently turning toward him. No movement, no sound. Only hollow gazes, dense as if the entire field had become a pair of enormous eyes. Elliot sank deep into the chair, heart frozen. The curse was no longer just a story he had been told. It had spoken his name, and it would not stop until the Granger family debt was repaid or another heir was pulled into the endless nightmare. Oh, I. The next morning, Elliot left the inn in a half-awake haze. The sky was gray, the dim light too weak to illuminate the empty streets clearly. He walked toward the old town hall, a low building with crumbling brick walls, moss-covered roof tiles, and wooden doors that creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, dust lay thick in the air, sunlight filtering through grimy window panes. Filer shelves were stacked high, many books nearly rotted away. Elliot groped through them like a man searching for his own memories, hands trembling as he turned pages brittle as ash. A 19th century land registry book made him freeze. One name stood out clearly: Nathaniel Granger, the owner of a large tract of land in Harrow's End in 1897. A note beside it read, "Sold to associates, disappeared with family." Elliot read it again and again, heart pounding. Nathaniel, his distant ancestor, the man who had helped seize a betrayed farmer's land, sowing the seed of the curse. He opened another file, a local court transcript, the handwriting shaky. Granger and Associates deny responsibility. Below, another scrawl in faded ink. Blood debt must be paid. Harvest season after harvest season. Elliot collapsed into a dusty wooden chair, body trembling. He realized clearly, the Granger family was not merely linked to the curse, they were its root. The town had decayed along the cracks left by their ancestors. Suddenly, the room seemed to shrink. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. When he looked up, dozens, even hundreds of dry handprints appeared on the walls, layered one atop the other, all pointing toward where he sat. Faint, yet unmistakably fresh, as if an invisible crowd had pressed close from all directions. Elliot leapt up, falling against a bookshelf. Files scattered across the floor. Among the papers, he spotted an old photograph. The Granger family from the turn of the century. The man standing in the center was Nathaniel, dark-eyed. Beside him, a boy of about 10, face strikingly similar to Elio's, eyes wide, staring through the lens as if looking straight into the future. He let the photo drop, yet the sense of being watched lingered. Even with eyes closed, he could see those gazes, piercing through space and time, reminding him that the curse was not merely a thing of the past. Stepping outside the building, Elliot drew a deep breath. The town lay silent, like a graveyard. Yet deep inside he knew, from now on, he was no longer an observer. He had become a link in the chain of cursed blood spanning over a century. Far across the field, the straw-hatted figure appeared again. This time, Elliot recognized him no longer as a stranger. Within the shadowy outline, he reflected a part of Elliot himself. A chilling reminder that past and present, the curse and the family, were now entwined with his life. Nelitant. Udaro. The final night of the harvest descended on Harrow's End. Elliot sat in his room, the desk lamp casting a pale yellow light on his hollowed face. His eyelids felt unbearably heavy, yet he dared not close them. Outside, the wind shifted, no longer slipping quietly through the cracks, but blowing in relentless gusts, as if a crowd of invisible bodies breathed in unison. Suddenly, everything stopped. Silence so absolute that Elliot could hear the pounding of his own heart. The world seemed frozen in place. He stood and stepped into the hallway. No phantom footsteps echoed like the nights before. Only absolute emptiness, darkness swallowing every trace of light. He walked down the main street, past darkened houses and abandoned shops. Each footstep echoed, emphasizing the void. When he reached the edge of the cornfield, moonlight faintly illuminated thousands of dry stalks, unmoving. Elliot held his breath. A subtle movement occurred. The rows of corn bent in unison, as if swept by invisible scythes. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Harvest Man. Tall and thin, tattered straw hat atop his head, scythe gleaming like a shattered moon in his hand. He did not rush, only took slow, deliberate steps. But with each heartbeat, the distance between him and Elliot shrank. From either side of the field, dozens of other figures rose. Hundreds, all wearing straw hats, hollow eyes fixed on him, standing silently. No movement, no sound. Their presence was dense, pressing in, making Elliot feel as if an invisible crowd was swallowing him whole. Harvest Man stopped a few steps away. The wind kicked up dust and leaves in a whirlwind. Amid the storm, a voice rang out, not from a single mouth, but from hundreds at once, a chorus. It's harvest time. The debt must be paid. Elliot clutched his head, mind reeling. Images of Nathaniel Granger, the betraying ancestor, flashed before him. Then came the faces of Grangers across generations, one after another, linked by cursed blood. They pressed down on him, reminding him there was no escape. In the dust-laden wind, Elliot lifted his gaze to the darkness of Harvest Man. This time he saw clearly. The face was his own. Twisted eye sockets empty, skin cracked and dry like parched earth. A choked cry escaped, but the wind swallowed it instantly. Harrow's End dissolved behind him. Every house, every street fading like smoke. Only the field remained, the wind, and the endless shadows. Elliot sensed one undeniable truth. The curse had recognized its successor. He was no longer an observer. He had become part of the eternal harvest, bound to Granger blood, whether he wanted it or not. The gray sky hung heavy. The wind whispered, and the field murmured again, waiting for the next season. Ah, why? In a forsaken graveyard of New England, no trees of wood take root. Instead, they rise from human bone, ribs twisting into skeletal branches, skulls swaying like pale, hollow fruit. Among them moves the gravekeeper, an ancient shadow, silently tending his garden of the damned. Each soul of the unfortunate, once sown, blossoms into another tree of bone, feeding the forest that should never have been. Nen Passy. The fog of New England clung to the earth like a burial shroud, veiling the narrow path that wound up the hill where the old cemetery lay. Michael Hale, a man in his 40s, walked slowly, one hand gripping a weathered leather notebook. An archaeologist by trade, he had little patience for folklore. To him, this graveyard was nothing more than a forgotten relic of the 17th century. Before arriving, Michael had heard the villagers' strange warnings. They told him never to set foot on the hill after sunset. They whispered of pale figures gliding through the mist, of groans rising from beneath the earth, of trees that grew not from wood but from bone. He had laughed, dismissing their words as superstition woven from fear. But the suffocating silence here gnawed at his certainty. At the crest of the hill, Michael stopped before a gate of blackened iron, rusted and twisted. The carvings of crossed bones were nearly worn away. A stone tablet bore a fading Latin inscription, Hic silentis locantur. Here, the silent still speak. He pressed his hand against the gate, the chill bit like metal drawn straight from ice. Inside stretched a garden of the dead. Tombstones leaned and fractured, their inscriptions lost to moss. Weeds choked the soil, yet here and there, pale shapes jutted from the earth like limestone shards. Michael crouched and realized they were fragments of bone, disturbingly clean, as though placed there deliberately rather than left to decay beneath the soil. Michael opened his notebook and began to record everything. The shape of graves, the weathered symbols, even the position of the bones. Then came a creak, sharp, deliberate. Michael's head snapped up. Across the cemetery, near the largest tomb, stood a figure. The fading light sketched a gaunt old man with a hunched back, a long coat trailing the ground, and a rusted spade in his hand. He did not move, yet his sunken eyes seemed fixed on Michael from within the hollow dark of their sockets. Michael swallowed hard. He had not expected a caretaker. Relief should have come, but instead, a cold shiver clawed its way down his spine. The old man's body did not shift, yet the creak came again, like a gate closing of its own accord. Michael turned. The iron gate stood shut behind him, silent and immovable, as if it had never opened at all. Ah! Michael instinctively stepped back as the old man advanced. His black coat dragged across the wet grass, with a sound like bones grinding together. The hollows of his eyes were deep and sunken, his stare pressing against Michael's chest, as if trying to pierce straight through him. "Night has fallen," the man rasped, his voice corroded like rusted iron. "This place does not belong to the living." Michael forced himself to remain steady. He raised the worn leather notebook, his tone firm. "I'm an archaeologist. I'm here only to survey these old graves. I'll cause no trouble." A crooked smile bent the old man's face. "Survey?" he echoed, tapping the head of his spade against the ground 3 times. The sound reverberated hollow and strange, not the thud of solid earth, but the echo of a void beneath. This soil does not hold history. It feeds. A chill ran through Michael, but pride in his profession pushed him forward. "If you are the caretaker, then surely you understand the archaeological value of this place. Some of these stones date back to the 17th century, perhaps even earlier." The old man bowed his head, his trembling hand stroking the shaft of the spade. "My name is Elias. I have tended this ground longer than anyone remembers. Those stones tell you nothing. What truly lives here does not rest above the earth." The wind stirred, carrying a rustling like countless hands scratching beneath the soil. Michael froze, his heart hammering. Through the grass, he glimpsed pale shapes, finger bones, writhing upward, retreating just as quickly. He blinked, and they were gone. Only the grass swayed. Elias watched him still, his lips moving as though in prayer. You should not remain past dark. After sunset, the soil hungers. Michael drew a sharp breath, etching the words into memory, though his rational mind refused surrender. I need only one night of study. Tomorrow morning, if you wish, I'll be gone. Elias regarded him in silence, then let out a low, broken laugh that cracked like brittle bone. One night, more than enough for the earth to notice you. He turned and shuffled deeper among the graves, his shadow dissolving into the leaning stones. Michael thought to call after him, but his throat tightened, no sound emerging. The headstones around him seemed to lean closer, their shadows tangling together like skeletal arms reaching outward. By the time the last light drained from the sky, Michael stood alone, the leather notebook open in his shaking hands. In the suffocating dark, only the scratch of his pen on paper could be heard. Yet beneath the damp soil, another sound stirred, an endless rasping, as though hundreds of skeletons breathed in rhythm with him. Noir. Night fell over New England as swiftly as if some unseen hand had snuffed out a vast lantern in the sky. The cemetery drowned beneath a heavy curtain of darkness, lit only by a pale crescent moon, its glow spilling across the crooked stones. Michael stood frozen, pen halted above the page. A strange silence pressed down. No insects, no owls, only the restless wind spiraling through ancient crypts. Then the sound returned. At first it was no more than the patter of pebbles, but it grew, grinding, splintering, the brittle crack of something breaking far beneath the soil. Michael staggered back, eyes locked on the grass at his feet. The earth swelled upward, as though something beneath clawed for release. A sharp snap split the night. From the ground, a shard of bone jutted skyward, pale and glistening under the moonlight. Another followed, curved like a branch. Horror clamped Michael's chest as he realized. Ribs. The branches bent and twisted, joints snapping into place, forming the grotesque outline of a tree clawing its way toward the sky. Not one, dozens. All around him, the earth quivered. Skulls burst from the grass like fruit. Hollow eyes turned toward him. The graveyard writhed, birthing bone trees that groaned as they rose, their skeletal limbs grinding together with a sickening chorus. Michael's breath caught as he stumbled back toward the largest tomb. In the weak moonlight, he saw what made it worse. Many of the trees still clung to tatters of clothing, shoelaces, scraps of fabric, even the glint of a wristwatch. These were not relics of centuries past. They were the remains of the missing. The wind howled, carrying with it a sound more dreadful than any gale. The broken murmur of countless voices. Michael strained to listen, heart pounding, and heard them. Help us! Release us! The earth devours. His legs trembled, but terror chained his eyes to the sight before him. The bone forest climbed higher, trunks weaving into a pale lattice, skulls dangling like rotten fruit, clacking against one another in the cold air. Some rose 10 feet high, their limbs creaking as though eager to embrace him. The cemetery had become a living garden of the damned. Michael turned to flee, but the ground at his back split open too, bone shoots sprouting and snapping shut around him. He was trapped, hemmed in by dozens of reaching trunks. A shudder cut down his spine as one tree nearby bent toward him. Its ribs groaned, splintering as they spread open like fingers ready to seize their prey. The air thickened with the stench of damp earth and the sickly sweetness of rotting flesh. Michael gagged, bile rising in his throat. With a strangled cry, he hurled himself toward the massive tomb at the cemetery's heart. Its stone door hung ajar beneath the moonlight, waiting. He didn't hesitate. He plunged inside and slammed the heavy slab shut behind him. Darkness swallowed him whole. The silence pressed so deep he could hear only the hammering of his own blood. And then, from the depths of the crypt, a whisper unfurled, long and serpentine. "You have entered the garden." Michael stiffened, ice coursing through his veins. In that moment he understood. He was no longer an observer. He was part of the soil now. "Me, I see." Inside the stone tomb, the darkness was thick as a drowned sea. Michael pressed his back against the heavy door, breath ragged, ears still echoing with the brittle crack of bones outside. The air was rank with mold and the faint iron tang of dried blood, choking his lungs until he thought he might suffocate. He flicked on his flashlight. Its trembling beam cut across damp stone walls slick with moss. But it was not only stone. The surface was carved over and over, a mad tapestry of names etched in desperate haste, hundreds of them, clawed in Latin, Old English, and symbols Michael had never seen before. They sprawled like curses left behind by those who vanished. At the tomb's far end stood an altar. Upon it lay a cracked ceramic vessel brimming with fragments of bone, pale and granular like salt. From the floor, black roots wormed upward, coiling around the remains, feeding on them. Michael staggered back, chilled with realization. The earth here did not merely devour, it cultivated. A rasping voice rose from the shadows behind him. "You've seen it now." Michael spun, light quivering across Elias, the gravekeeper, stepping forth from the dark. He still clutched his rusted spade, his coat dragging low, but the beam revealed something worse. His skin was fissured with cracks, in places peeling back to expose the bone beneath. Beneath that wrinkled husk, Elias was little more than another living tree of bone. What are you?" Michael stammered. Elias chuckled, the sound sharp as snapping ribs. "I am only the sour. You saw the garden outside. The soil thirsts for souls. It devours the dead, but without a hand to tend them, they would wither. I feed them. I watch over them." Michael trembled, yet curiosity forced the words from him. "And the missing? They are your trees as well." Elias inclined his head slowly. "The wanderers, the sinners, even the curious, like you. Any who set foot upon this land become seed for the garden. That is the covenant. The earth grants me existence, and in return I plant. Call me monster if you will. I have only kept my vow." Michael backed away, heart pounding. I can't stay here." Elias advanced, his shadow stretching across the walls, carved with the names of the dead. "You are already here. The gate behind you will never open again. The earth has recognized you, and it craves you for its next tree." The flashlight shook in Michael's grip, its beam catching Elias's face. His eyes were no longer eyes at all, only gaping hollows. From his mouth writhed slender bone roots, squirming like parasites. Elias raised the spade, its handle blackened, its blade glinting cold. "I do not kill you," he whispered. "I plant you." The ground beneath Michael split apart, jagged cracks yawning wide. Skeletal hands thrust up, clutching at his ankles. He screamed, struggling, but the grip only tightened, dragging him inch by inch toward the soil. In that frantic instant, clarity struck him. He had only two paths: surrender to the Earth's hunger, or shatter this vile covenant, whatever price it demanded, even if it cost his own life. And Elias stood above him, smiling faintly, the way a farmer smiles as the seed finally sinks into the waiting ground. "Na, Ingen, Umaya." Michael screamed, wrenching at his legs as skeletal hands clamped tighter, dragging him down. The pull tore his skin open, blood spilling into the soil, hungrily swallowed as if poured onto smoldering ash. Despair crushed his chest, suffocating every breath. "No, I don't belong here." He clawed at the stone wall, desperate to resist the Earth's hunger. Elias only watched, hollow eyes sinking deeper into shadow, his voice calm and resonant, like a litany whispered at the end of time. "You belong to the garden the moment you set foot here. Your blood will enrich the soil. Your bones will bloom into new branches. Do not resist. Let the earth claim you." Michael's frantic gaze darted to the altar. The fractured clay urn lay there, brimming with bone dust, its surface tangled in writhing black roots that trembled like starving veins. A thought pierced his panic. If the garden's existence was bound to that vessel, breaking it might sever the pact. With the last of his strength, he lunged, clutching a jagged stone from the tomb wall. The skeletal hands gripped harder, pulling him waist-deep into the ground, but Michael roared, hurling the rock with all his fury at the urn. It shattered with a violent crack. Fragments flew, bone dust burst into the air like a pale storm. From beneath the earth rose a shriek, thousands of voices howling as one, an unholy choir of souls torn free. The skeletal hands around him convulsed, then loosened their grip. Elias's roar split the chamber, his voice breaking for the first time. "You fool! You do not understand what you've done." The tomb quaked. The ceiling split, stones raining down. Michael scrambled free, dragging himself toward the sealed door. His hand pressed against the cold slab, then froze. His fingers were no longer flesh, but bare white bone, the skin shriveled and peeling away. He looked down in horror. His legs, too, were changing, skin splitting open, bones stretching outward like gnarled roots. The price of breaking the covenant was not freedom, but transformation. A seed, stronger, hungrier, was taking root. Elias writhed in the collapsing dark, yet laughter rasped from his withering throat. "Did you think you escaped? No. You have only taken my place." Michael's scream curdled into the cracking of bone. His body bent and warped, limbs driving deep into the soil, veins hardening into root, joints twisting into branches. His mind dimmed, hollowed, until only the hunger remained, spreading, devouring, eternal. By dawn, the graveyard stood silent, cloaked in mist. The bone trees towered motionless, their pale branches gleaming like ivory. At the garden's heart rose a new trunk, its limbs stark white, and from them dangled a broken pen and a blood-stained notebook. The Garden of Bone had claimed another, and it would never cease to grow. Known. Within the abandoned asylum, rusted wires bite into effigies suspended in endless decay. Their hollow forms sway gently, as if lulled by a breath that no longer belongs to the living. When night falls, the silence fractures. The figures convulse, their heads twisting in unison to a broken funereal rhythm. Jonah pulled the car to a halt on the gravel road, where withered trees stretched their skeletal branches toward the ashen sky. Before him loomed the asylum, a corpse of concrete and steel, windows shattered, walls peeled and veined with moss. Clara stepped out, her old camera slung over her shoulder, eyes caught between curiosity and dread. They had heard the stories whispered 100 times before. Muffled cries echoing down the corridors, shadows dangling in broken windows, and always the same dreaded name, Dr. Harland. Jonah recounted to Clara the rumors of Harland's puppet therapy, drilling into skulls, wiring patients so their bodies could be made to dance. Many dismissed it as grotesque folklore, but others swore those experiments were the very reason the asylum was shuttered overnight. They pushed at the rust-eaten steel doors. Inga screamed, the sound dragging down the hallway like metal tearing bone. Inside, the stench of ancient disinfectant mingled with mildew, as though the air itself had been trapped since the 60s. Clara lifted her camera, snapping shot after shot. Rusted bed frames, suffocating corridors, padded cells gone rotten with mold. Jonah led the way, jotting notes. Clara said nothing, only pressed her shutter again, as though afraid the building's truth might vanish if she didn't capture it fast enough. Darkness thickened as daylight drained from the high windows, swallowing the halls whole. They stopped at the threshold of the great auditorium, where a collapsed wooden stage waited under a ceiling of rusting beams. Jonah felt his own footsteps strike too loud, the echoes bouncing back as though someone unseen matched his pace. Clara drew in a breath, her lens trembling as she tilted it toward the rafters. A sudden flash erupted. For the briefest instant, Jonah glimpsed something. Someone suspended high above. Then blackness reclaimed it. He craned his neck upward, heart pounding, while the air grew heavier, pressing on his chest. From somewhere deep within the asylum came a sound, a drawn-out metallic screech, like strings being tested in the dark. Clara's whisper cracked the silence. We're not the only ones here. Jonah flicked on his flashlight, its narrow beam slicing through the dark. The light swept across the steel rafters above, and his breath caught. Shapes dangled from the beams. From a distance, they looked like patients in tattered hospital gowns, but their skin was gray, stiff, and lifeless as wood. Clara lowered her camera, hands trembling. She had managed one last shot before the flash revealed the horrific truth. One of the figures twitched, a hand jerking slightly, its neck bent at an unnatural angle as if yanked by invisible reins. Jonah swore every hollow eye socket had turned toward them. A chorus of metallic shrieks echoed overhead. The wires shuddered, pulling the hanging forms taut. Then they moved. Not with the fluidity of the living, but stiff and jerky, like wooden marionettes forced to dance. Heads snapped in unison, arms lifted, legs curled, all to a rhythm only they could hear. Jonah staggered back against the wall, cold sweat breaking across his skin. He remembered the patient files he'd studied, rumors of skulls drilled open, wires fed into spines, bodies turned into living puppets. He had never believed it. Not until now. Clara clutched his arm, whispering, They're still being controlled, but by who? A heavier movement drew their eyes upward. From the shattered stage at the far end of the hall, something massive was rising. It was no longer a man, but a grotesque fusion of steel cables, rotting wood, and clattering joints. A face patched together, half man, half puppet, hung above a hulking body. Jonah knew instantly who it was, Dr. Harland, or what remained of him. The giant puppet bent low, its elongated arms sweeping wide. When it yanked a lever of wire, every dangling patient screamed in unison, a cacophony of cracking wood, grinding joints, and rusted hinges shrieking. The sound drove Clara to her knees, hands clamped over her ears. Jonah tried to haul her up, his eyes locked on the advancing horde. From the rafters, wires slithered downward like roots, snaking toward the floor, carrying the stench of rust and blood. There was only one choice left: flee deeper into the asylum's maze, or be hoisted up as another lifeless puppet. Jonah gripped Clara's hand hard and shouted, "Run!" Their footsteps thundered down the corridor, chased by the mad symphony of shrieking wires and the wooden convulsions of puppets dancing to their unseen master's tune. Wah! The narrow corridor stretched into infinity. Every step Jonah and Clara took echoing like a death knell. The trembling beam of the flashlight swept across half-open iron doors, their nameplates faded with time. Room 12, Special Therapy, Room 23, Behavioral Experiments. Wind hissed through cracks in the walls, sounding like the labored breaths of invisible patients. Jonah ran, forcing his lungs into rhythm. In his mind, the asylum's cryptic notes spun in a vicious cycle: marionette therapy, restoring willpower through external control. He had never believed anyone could be cruel enough to attempt such things. But now the truth dangled on wires behind them, swaying in pursuit. Clara halted, pointing to a door left ajar. The faint red lettering still lingered: operating room. "Jonah, we have to look," she gasped. "There might be answers inside." Jonah hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to keep running, but Clara's gaze, terrified yet unyielding, pulled him forward. Together, they shoved the door open. The operating room lay in darkness, save for a few dangling bulbs. One flickered to life with a sickly yellow glow, spotlighting the center table. There, shackled in place, lay the skeleton of a patient, ribcage punctured, spine threaded with rusted wires. Clara lifted her camera and clicked. The flash burst across the back wall, unveiling a grotesque mosaic, dozens of sketches tacked side by side. Human bodies redrawn as puppets, their joints hinged with steel, every pencil stroke marking a drill wound. In the center hung the largest draft, its title scrawled in bold: Project Marionette, Total Control. Jonah's stomach twisted. He stepped closer, trembling fingers brushing the smeared ink. At the corner, a signature still lingered: crooked, desperate, Harland, 1963. A sudden clang of metal jolted them. They spun around as the ceiling cracked, wires slithering downward to coil around the skeleton's limbs. The corpse jerked violently, then sat upright, jaw grinding with a splintering rasp. Dot. Clara screamed, while Jonah dragged her into the corner. The puppet corpse staggered forward, wires threaded through its eye sockets and chest, twitching with each unnatural step. Every footfall was the sound of wood splintering, every pull of the wires a discordant note. From the distance came a voice, low and rhythmic, like a conductor's count. 1, 2, 3. Jonah froze. Harland was orchestrating the entire asylum like a stage, each puppet moving to his cadence. He squeezed Clara's hand, eyes locked on the narrow exit across the room. "Run, when I say now." The puppet advanced, iron arm swinging down. Jonah zeised a rusted bar from the floor and swung upward, clashing against the blow. The screech of metal on metal shrieked through the room, sparks flying. In that instant, Clara dashed through the door, Jonah racing after her. They plunged into another corridor, leaving behind the relentless beat echoing through the asylum, louder, heavier, as if the building itself had a pulse. Jonah gasped for air, one truth burning inside him. Unless they destroyed the thing at the center of it all, they too would be dragged upward to dangle among the others, lifeless marionettes swaying in Harland's grip. Nisai, never way. The metallic shrieks of the wires still trailed them, but Jonah was beginning to notice a pattern. The cadence, 1, 2, 3, echoed from deep within the asylum, steady as a war drum. Each time the rhythm quickened, the puppets they encountered in the corridors twitched awake, turning in unison toward them. "Clara," he whispered, "the sound guides them. If we follow it, we'll find where Harland is pulling the strings." Clara nodded, her face pale, but a spark of resolve flickered in her eyes. She clutched the camera as if it were the last weapon she had. They descended a rotting spiral staircase. Dust coated the steps, clawed with endless gouges where wires had scraped across the stone. Jonah's hand skimmed the damp brick wall, the chill sinking into his skin like a parasite. As they dropped another level, the beat grew clearer, merging with the taut whine of wires pulled too tight, like a violin tuned past breaking. At the bottom stood a massive iron door. 2 words were carved into its surface: Control Ward. It hung slightly ajar, and through the crack spilled a red glow, pulsing with every count of the rhythm. Jonah drew a sharp breath and pushed it open. Inside lay a circular chamber, its ceiling a high dome from which hundreds of wires dangled like metallic roots. Each tether fed into colossal gears that churned with a grinding tempo. And at the very center, enthroned upon a towering chair, sat the husk of Dr. Harland. His body was no longer whole. Half his face had rotted away, yet his eyes remained open, milky and unblinking. Wires pierced his ribs, spine, even the skull itself, latching him into the machinery. Each turn of the gears yanked his body in violent spasms, and with every jolt came the thunder of puppets shifting above. Clara covered her mouth, choking back a scream. Jonah could not look away. This was no mere mad doctor. Harland had transformed himself into the mechanical heart of the asylum, a grotesque puppeteer wired to his own stage. Suddenly, Harland's eyes swiveled, locking onto them. A voice rolled out, not from his mouth, but from every wire, reverberating through the chamber as though the building itself spoke. "The final audience has arrived." The wires shuddered, glowing red-hot. From the fissures in the walls, the patients emerged, dozens of them, shuffling forward. Wooden hands and iron limbs scraped across the floor, closing the circle. Jonah dragged Clara back toward the far corner. His mind raced. He couldn't fight this army. But if Harland was the center, destroying the machinery might end it all. "Clara, listen," he hissed, urgent. "We have to break the main gear. If it stops, everything stops with it." Clara swallowed hard, then nodded. She clutched the camera tighter, ready to hurl it if it meant shattering steel. The puppets advanced, the circle closing in. Harlan's laughter rattled through the dome, blending with the screech of grinding gears, a death orchestra swelling to crescendo. Jonah tightened his grip on the rusted iron bar, eyes locked on the glowing heart of the machine. There was only one chance, to strike before the wires closed in, before they too were bound, suspended among the asylum's collection of lifeless marionettes. Wah! Jonah tightened his grip on the iron rod, his heart pounding like a war drum. The puppets closed in, their hollow eyes gleaming, wires shrieking as they strained. At the center, Harlan convulsed with each grinding turn of the gears, half his ruined face curled into a grotesque smile. The audience must join the final act, his voice echoed through the dome, drawn out like a warped lullaby. With a roar, Jonah charged the machine. The iron rod slammed into the blazing gear, sparks bursting in a violent spray. The mechanism shuddered, wires slackened, and the puppets staggered in confusion. Clara screamed his name, her eyes wide with terror. But Harlan would not yield. Wires slashed down from the rafters, coiling around Jonah's arm, wrenching him into the grinding maw. His body jolted violently, blood streaking across steel, mingling with the pulsing red glow. Clara rushed forward, clawing to free him, but Jonah's trembling hand pressed against her chest, stopping her. "Clara, run," he gasped, tears brimming in his eyes. "Let me end this." Her scream cracked the silence, but the wires twisted tighter, dragging Jonah into the core of the machine. With the last breath of his strength, he raised the rod and drove it down. The gear split apart with a thunderous crack. Light flared, then died. Silence swallowed the chamber. The puppets collapsed where they stood, strings cut, lifeless. Harlan's body crumbled with them, torn to rusted wire and rotted bone. Clara fell to her knees. Before her lay only shattered metal and a smear of blood, the last trace of Jonah. He had been consumed by the machine he destroyed. Beyond the asylum walls, dawn broke at last. Pale light crept through shattered windows, but in Clara's eyes it reflected nothing but a hollow void. The memory of Jonah and the shriek of steel wires would haunt her forever, like a play that refused to end, its curtain never falling. And PC.